The doctor cleared his throat, glancing between me and Clara. "John, your leg isn't improving as we had hoped. We're recommending a medical discharge." Clara's hand tightened on mine, her eyes welling up, but a slight, almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of her mouth gave me a chill. She dabbed her eyes, whispering, "It's for the best, darling." The unspoken judgment in the doctor's eyes, the pity, sealed my fate. I was broken, and she had just confirmed it. My return from Afghanistan had not been a hero's welcome, more like a medical evacuation. An IED had rearranged my lower left leg, leaving me with a collection of metal pins and a limp that would not quit. I remembered the white hospital walls, the antiseptic smell, and Clara's face. She was pale, drawn, her eyes swollen from crying. She told me about the baby, our baby, lost while I was in recovery. A miscarriage, she'd said. It was a shared wound, a quiet sorrow we carried, though mine felt overshadowed by the physical pain and the dull ache of a military career cut short. The doctors at Walter Reed had given me a medical discharge. I was 32, a decorated sergeant, and now just John Miller, with a fused ankle and a future I hadn't planned. 2 years crawled by. The ache in my leg became a constant companion, a dull background thrum. Clara and I moved from our cramped quarters at Fort Benning to Fort Lewis, Washington, hoping the change of scenery would settle things. The new house was bigger, a 3-bedroom, 2-bath with a garage. It felt like a fresh start, the kind the Army offered when it wanted to smooth over rough edges. We had boxes everywhere, remnants of a dozen moves, each labeled in Clara's neat handwriting. Most were marked kitchen or linens, the usual detritus of a couple trying to build a life. I was in the garage one Tuesday afternoon, the air thick with the smell of sawdust and old cardboard. Clara was inside, probably arranging the pantry by color, as was her habit. My job was the garage, the final frontier of unpacking. I pulled down a box from the top shelf, marked simply MISC. It felt lighter than expected. Inside, nestled beneath a crumpled newspaper from 2008, I found a small wooden box. It wasn't one of ours, or at least I had never seen it before. Dark stained wood, unvarnished, with a simple brass latch. It looked like something from an old curio shop, or perhaps an attic sale. My fingers hesitated over the latch, a strange premonition twisting in my gut. I opened it. Inside, tied with a thin, faded pink ribbon, were several white envelopes. They were official-looking, heavy paper, uncreased, sealed. The ribbon was tight, as if whatever it held was meant to stay bound. My hands, usually steady, felt clumsy as I untied the bow. I picked up the top envelope. It had no name, no address, just the crisp texture of legal paper. I slid my thumb under the flap and pulled out a single sheet. It was an official certificate of live birth. My eyes scanned the text. Child's name, Daisy, a girl. Date of birth, January 14th, 2010. January 14th, 2010. The date punched me in the gut. That was the Iraq day Clara had told me our baby died. The day she'd called, her voice choked with tears, explaining the sudden, unexplainable loss. I looked further down the certificate. Mother's name, Clara Miller, née Johnson. No doubt there. Clara's maiden name, a detail that resonated with clarity. Then my gaze fell on the line meant for the father. Father's name, unknown. The word hung in the air, cold, stark, unwavering, unknown. My breath caught. A chill spread through me, not from the garage's temperature, but from the sudden, impossible disconnect. Clara and I had been married for 2 years by then. We had been trying for a baby. The idea of an unknown father was a logical impossibility. My fingers fumbled for the next envelope. This one was thicker, multi-page, adoption papers. My eyes darted to the top, then the middle. In the matter of the adoption of Daisy, born January 14th, 2010, to Clara Miller, it laid out the facts in stark, clinical language. Clara had given up parental rights. The baby had been adopted. The documents stated the biological father's identity was unknown, therefore his consent was not required. The words hammered at me: identity unknown, consent not required. I sat on a stack of unopened moving boxes, the cold concrete floor seeping into my jeans. The legal language, precise and unforgiving, painted a picture entirely different from the one Clara had painted with her tears and hushed grief. She hadn't miscarried. She had given birth to a daughter named Daisy, and she had given her away, explicitly stating the father was unknown. The silence in the garage was absolute, punctuated only by the distant hum of a lawnmower from across the street. The pieces didn't fit, not with Clara's story, not with our life. I folded the papers, tucked them back into the box, and placed the box exactly where I'd found it, under the newspaper. My mind was reeling, a tight, cold knot forming in my stomach. I needed to move, to think. I walked out of the garage, past Clara's meticulous order, and got into my truck. I drove without direction for a few minutes before pulling onto the highway, heading towards the golf course near base. They served a decent breakfast there, and I just needed a cup of coffee and some space. I sat at a small table, pushing a plate of eggs around, the bland taste doing little to settle the turmoil inside me. The casual chatter of the other early risers felt distant, muted. When I returned home an hour later, the garage door was down, and the house was quiet. Clara was in the living room, humming softly as she arranged a collection of framed photos on the mantelpiece. She glanced up, smiled. "Almost done with the kitchen, honey. Just a few more boxes." Her efficiency, her calm, felt like a cruel joke, a stark contrast to the earthquake that had just ravaged my own insides. I retreated to my small office, a room I'd just started setting up with my old desk and laptop. The papers in the wooden box were a constant loop in my head. Daisy, unknown father, adoption. Clara's story of a miscarriage, so convincing, so heartbreaking at the time. My mind, usually organized and precise, felt like a tangled fishing line. I tried to focus on an old report from my last deployment, something to anchor me, but the words blurred. The betrayal was a heavy blanket, suffocating. That night, I waited. Clara went to bed around 10, her usual routine. I heard her moving around upstairs, the soft creak of the floorboards, the muffled sound of her getting ready for sleep. When silence finally settled, I grabbed a pillow and a blanket from the linen closet and made a makeshift bed on the living room couch. I needed distance, physical and emotional. I couldn't lie next to her, not with the documents burning a hole in my memory. I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew, Clara was standing over me, the morning light filtering through the blinds. Her face was tight, her arms crossed. "What is wrong with you, John?" she demanded, her voice sharper than usual. "You've been acting like a stranger since yesterday. If you have something to say, just say it. Otherwise, I'm leaving. I can't deal with this silence." I pushed myself up, the springs of the couch groaning under my weight. My voice felt rough, unused. "Have a safe trip, Clara," I said, my gaze steady, flat. The words hung in the air, a finality to them that even surprised me. It was a dismissal, a quiet, cold declaration that there was nothing more to discuss, at least not in the way she wanted. Her eyes widened, a flicker of something, surprise, anger, passing through them. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned on her heel and walked away. I heard her upstairs, the sound of drawers opening and closing, a suitcase being dragged across the floor. Within the hour, she was gone. I heard her car pulling out of the driveway, the crunch of gravel. I didn't move from the couch. She hadn't taken everything, just a couple of suitcases. The house felt emptier, but also, strangely, clearer. The next morning, I drove to Fort Lewis Base. My commanding officer, Captain Peterson, was in his office sorting through paperwork. He was a straight shooter, a man who valued facts. I laid the birth certificate and adoption papers on his desk. He picked them up, his brow furrowing as he read. "This is something, Miller," he said, his voice low, shaking his head slowly. He looked at me, then back at the papers. "A child given up for adoption? An unknown father? And the mother is Clara? Your wife?" He paused, then continued. "Finding a child in adoption cases, especially closed ones like this, is next to impossible, John. You know how the system works. It's designed to protect everyone involved." I nodded, the words echoing my own understanding. "I know, sir, but I found something else in that box, a pacifier." I told him about the wooden box, about the faint scent of baby powder that still clung to the fabric of the little pacifier. It was tucked in with the documents, almost like an afterthought. I figure if there's any way to connect it to Daisy, to Clara, it's through DNA. Peterson leaned back in his chair, tapping the papers against his desk. DNA, huh? That's a long shot, John. But I can't say I blame you for trying to figure this out. This is a hell of a thing to spring on a man. He looked at the calendar on his wall. You want to take a day? Go chase this down? Yes, sir, I'd appreciate that, I said. I drove straight home. The house was still quiet, the air stale. I went back to the garage, retrieved the small wooden box, and carefully took out the pacifier. It was a simple, clear plastic ring with a silicone nipple. I placed it in a small, sterile plastic bag I found in the kitchen. Then I headed for the master bathroom. I needed a sample from Clara. Her hairbrush, sitting on the counter, seemed the most logical choice. I pulled out a few strands of dark hair, long and fine, tangled in the bristles, and bagged them separately. I spent the next hour on my laptop researching DNA testing's labs. I bypassed the online kits, looking for a professional, accredited lab that could handle a request like mine. I found one in downtown Seattle, a place that specialized in legal and forensic DNA analysis. It was a 2-hour drive, but I didn't hesitate. The lab was tucked away in an old brick building, nondescript. A woman with thick glasses and a lab coat met me at the counter. I explained in a measured tone what I needed, a comparison between the pacifier and the hair strands. She took the bags, wrote up a form, and told me it would take about 3 weeks for the results. We'll call you as soon as they're in, she said, her voice clinical. I paid the fee, a significant sum, but it felt like a necessary investment in the truth. As I drove home, my phone rang. It was Clara. Her voice was tight with suppressed fury. What did you mean, John? Eliminate or divorce? You think you can just abandon me and then treat me like I'm a criminal? I gripped the steering wheel, my voice even. I meant I need 3 weeks. When I have the answers I'm looking for, I'll know what my decision is. For now, there's nothing more to discuss. You can't just ignore me, John, she shouted, her anger finally breaking through. I can, I replied, and hung up. My phone rang again almost immediately, but I let it go to voicemail. I needed to maintain the distance, the cold logic that was now my only compass. Emotions, I knew, would only cloud the facts. The next morning, Clara returned. I was in the driveway loading a bag of trash into my truck when her car screeched to a halt behind me. She got out, her face red, her hands balled into fists. What in God's name is going on, John? She demanded, her voice rising. You throw me out. You won't talk to me. What have I done? I straightened up, turning to face her. The trash bag felt heavy in my hand. I'm not throwing you out, Clara. You left. And as for what's going on, I think you know. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. I wanted facts, not theatrics. Why don't you tell me? I'm hoping for some kind of explanation. The word hope was carefully chosen, a deliberate barb. I watched her eyes. They widened, a sudden flicker of understanding, then terror. The color drained from her face. Explanation. What are you talking about? She stammered, her voice suddenly weak. There's nothing to explain. You're being irrational. She tried to deny it, but the change in her posture, the sudden shift from anger to panic, confirmed everything. You found something, didn't you? What did you find? Please, John, don't believe whatever you found. It's not what it seems. She started to plead, her voice trembling. I cut her off. You have 1 hour, Clara. 1 hour to pack the rest of your things and leave this house, permanently. When I get back from work tonight, I expect all your belongings to be gone. Everything. I tossed the trash bag into the truck bed, got in, and started the engine. I didn't wait for her reply. I drove away, leaving her standing in the driveway, looking small and lost. When I returned that evening, the house was different. More than different. It was empty. Not entirely empty, but almost. The sofa, the dining table, the lamps, the rugs. Most of it was gone. She had taken the bedroom set too. Only a few items remained, my old recliner, a bookshelf full of my military history books, and a small kitchen table with 2 chairs. A clean sweep almost. It left the house feeling hollow, echoing with a new, stark emptiness. The next morning, I went into the office and explained my situation to Captain Peterson. He listened, silent, then nodded. Understood, John. We can arrange for temporary government furniture for you. Just submit the request. He knew better than to ask for details. I filed the paperwork. Then I started the methodical work of disentangling our lives. I called the credit union first, closed the joint account, opened a new one in my name. Next, the stockbroker, transferred my shares into a separate account. Then, the insurance company, removed her from all policies. Each call was a step, a deliberate move in a chess game I hadn't asked to play. I also made an appointment with a military lawyer, a JAG officer on base. Captain Reynolds was her name. I laid out the situation, the divorce, the assets. We don't own the house, sir, I explained. It's government quarters, but we have savings, investments. Captain Reynolds listened patiently. In Washington state, any assets acquired during the marriage are considered community property, regardless of whose name they're in. Even if Clara wasn't working, she'd likely be entitled to half. No property ownership in the traditional sense means we avoid a complex real estate division, but everything else is on the table. Her voice was calm, factual. It was what I expected. The law was the law. Life settled into a new routine. I went to work, came home to the echoing house. I cooked simple meals, washed my clothes, cleaned the sparse rooms. The silence was absolute. Days bled into weeks. Each morning I would check the mail, half expecting, half dreading, to see something from the day lab. Each evening I would look at the small wooden box, still tucked away in the garage. The secret it held a constant weight. My logical investigator brain was in overdrive, constantly sifting through past conversations, looking for clues, inconsistencies, moments when Clara's story might have subtly diverged from the truth. Finally, the call came. It was Sharon from the DNA Analysis Center. Mr. Miller, your results are ready for pickup. We'll need you to come in person to view them. Can you mail them? I asked, my voice betraying none of the sudden rush of adrenaline. We can, but for verification purposes, we do prefer an in-person viewing, especially given the nature of the samples. We'll need to confirm your identity. I'll be there, I said without hesitation. I wanted it direct. No delays, no waiting for the mail, no chance for the information to be diluted or delayed. I wanted the cold, hard facts, face to face. Seattle was a 2-hour drive. I could be there by late afternoon. The drive to Seattle felt longer this time, the anticipation a dull thrum beneath my skin. When I arrived at the DNA Analysis Center, I walked directly to the reception desk. John Miller for a results pickup, I stated, my voice steady. Sharon, the woman with glasses, emerged from a back office. She recognized me. Mr. Miller, please, she said, her tone professional, subdued. She led me down a narrow corridor to a small, sterile room furnished with a single table and 2 chairs. It had the air of a place where serious, often life-altering, information was delivered. I took a seat, and she sat opposite me. I handed over my military ID. She examined it, then nodded, satisfied. She left the room, returning a moment later with a file and a small, clear plastic bag. Inside the bag was the pacifier I had provided weeks ago. She placed it on the table between us. All right, Mr. Miller, Sharon began, her gaze direct. We've completed the analysis. She opened the file. For clarity, your sample, the buccal swab we took from you, was sample A. The hairbrush provided Clara Miller's DNA, which we labeled sample B. The pacifier contained genetic material, which we labeled sample C. She paused, looking at me to ensure I was following. Our analysis confirms sample A is indeed your DNA. Now, regarding the key findings, we have conclusively determined that sample B from the hairbrush and sample C from the pacifier are positively related. This indicates a biological mother-child relationship between Clara Miller and the individual whose DNA was present on the pacifier. The words were precise, clinical, positively related. It was the cold, hard confirmation of what I had suspected. Clara had not miscarried. She had given birth to a daughter, Daisy, and given her up for adoption. The logical pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, not with a crash, but with a quiet, undeniable finality. There was no emotional outburst, No sudden flood of tears, just a cold, hard settling of facts. My suspicions, my dreadful fear, had been validated by science. I'll need a full, detailed report, I stated, my voice calm. Copies of all findings, methodologies, everything. Sharon nodded. Of course, we'll have that prepared for you. It will include all the technical data and our certified conclusions. We can email a digital copy and mail a physical one. Both, I said. I left the lab with the weight of the truth settling heavy on my shoulders, yet also with a renewed sense of purpose. The uncertainty was gone. Now there was only the path forward. The betrayal was concrete, undeniable. The moment I stepped out of the building, I pulled out my phone and called Captain Peterson. Sir, the DNA results are in. They confirm Clara is the biological mother of the child in the adoption papers. Peterson's voice was grim. Understood, John. This moves things into a different league. Your JAG attorney can advise you on the divorce proceedings, but for the specifics of paternity and potential adoption fraud, you'll need civilian counsel. Someone who specializes in family law. This is outside the typical military jurisdiction for a full legal pursuit. I understand, sir. I drove home, my mind already shifting gears. The drive was a blur of highway and distant thought. I began researching family law attorneys specializing in paternity and adoption fraud. My old military precision kicked in. I wouldn't just look for any lawyer, I would find the best. I needed someone who understood the complexities of a case involving a hidden child, a fraudulent adoption, and a betrayal of this magnitude. That night, I sat at my empty kitchen table, a blank document open on my laptop. I started to draft a formal statement, a summary of my findings, the date of Daisy's birth, the DNA confirmation, Clara's false narrative of a miscarriage. Every detail, every inconsistency laid out in chronological order. This would be the foundation of my legal case. I also began compiling a financial dossier. Bank statements, investment records, my pay stubs, Clara's limited income from part-time work over the years. The lawyer had said half of all shared assets. I would have every penny accounted for. I needed to know exactly what was at stake, what I was fighting to protect, and what she would attempt to claim. My world became smaller, colder. My interactions were brief, factual. I isolated myself, not out of grief, but out of a need for clarity, for objective distance. Emotions were a hindrance. I focused on the facts, on the evidence, on the methodical steps required to unravel the deception and rebuild whatever remained of my life. I found Mr. Davies through a colleague's recommendation. He was a Seattle attorney known for his meticulous approach to complex divorce cases. His office was understated, functional, much like the man himself. I laid out the file, the birth certificate, the adoption papers, and the DNA report. Mr. Davies read through each document, his expression unchanging. A slight nod of his head, the only indication of his processing. When he finished, he steepled his fingers on his desk. Mr. Miller, this presents a clear and strong case for marital fraud. The concealment of a child, the false narrative of a miscarriage, and the unknown father declaration on official documents. These are serious matters. It's not just a simple divorce anymore. He outlined the strategy. We'll file for divorce, citing infidelity and deception. That's crucial. Then we will petition the court to unseal the adoption records. While adoption records are typically sealed to protect the privacy of all parties, evidence of fraud or misrepresentation in the original process can provide grounds to challenge that seal. I listened, absorbing the legal jargon, the strategic implications. My focus was on objective outcomes, on dismantling the lie, not on emotional vindication. Proceed, I instructed, my voice unwavering. The divorce petition was filed, a cold, official document listing the charges, infidelity and deception. It was a formal declaration, a public statement of the facts I now possessed. It was a message to Clara that I was not backing down. Clara, through her own attorney, responded swiftly. Her lawyer, a younger woman with an aggressive reputation, tried to challenge the DNA evidence, claiming tampering or error. The samples were not collected under forensic conditions, her attorney argued, therefore the chain of custody is compromised. Mr. Davies was prepared. He presented the detailed chain of custody protocols from the DNA lab, showing how my samples in the pacifier had been handled, bagged, and processed. He pointed out the lab's accreditation and its reputation. The court dismissed Clara's claims. The DNA evidence stood. News of the scandalous divorce began to circulate, first within our small military community at Fort Lewis, then more broadly. Whispers followed me at the commissary, subtle glances from colleagues in the office. No direct questions, but an unspoken curiosity. My reputation for professionalism, however, remained intact. I continued my duties without falter, presenting a stoic front. The military values discipline, and I was demonstrating it in spades. A letter arrived from Clara's lawyer proposing a quick, quiet settlement. A financial offer, vaguely worded, hinting at a desire to avoid further public exposure. I handed it to Mr. Davies without comment. "Refuse it," I told him. "I want full transparency. I want this to go through the legal process, however long it takes." "Understood, Mr. Miller," he replied, a faint smile playing on his lips. That's what I anticipated. I continued my methodical work, gathering every financial record, every detail of our shared assets, bank statements, investment portfolios, tax returns. No stone was left unturned. This wasn't about greed, it was about understanding the full scope of what had been hidden, what was rightfully mine, and what Clara would be entitled to under the law, despite her deception. In the evenings, I began to journal. Not as a diary of feelings, but as a factual record. Date, time, event, conversations with Mr. Davies, court filings, financial discoveries. It was another layer of my logical investigation, an objective chronicle of events, a backup in case anything was ever disputed. The thought of Daisy, the daughter I never knew, resurfaced often. Could I find her? The legal complexities of adoption privacy were formidable, even with my evidence of fraud. Mr. Davies had explained that while unsealing the records might reveal her adoptive parents, it wouldn't necessarily grant me access to her. It was a long, arduous process, fraught with legal and ethical challenges. I pushed that desire down, for now. First, the truth about Clara, then perhaps the truth about Daisy. My focus returned to the immediate legal battle. The court, acting on Mr. Davies' motion, granted a temporary order freezing all our joint assets. No withdrawals, no transfers, nothing. It was a tactical victory, ensuring Clara couldn't liquidate accounts or hide funds before the divorce settlement was finalized. My life was being meticulously disassembled, piece by piece. But with each step, I felt closer to uncovering the full truth. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. Mr. Davies filed the motion to unseal Daisy's adoption records. His argument was clear. The evidence of fraud committed by Clara, coupled with my significant emotional and financial investment in a marital union predicated on deceit, established a compelling reason. I might not be Daisy's biological father, but I was the man Clara had defrauded by fabricating a miscarriage during my severe injury in deployment. This fraud directly impacted my life and my potential paternal rights had I been aware of the birth. The court scheduled a hearing. Clara's attorney vigorously opposed the motion, citing the privacy of the adoptive family and the child. It was a standard legal maneuver. But Mr. Davies was anticipating it. In parallel, Mr. Davies and his team began to investigate Clara's past. They focused on the period leading up to our marriage and, more critically, the time I was deployed in Afghanistan. It was a meticulous process of tracking down old addresses, contacting former employers, and sifting through social media. They uncovered a pattern of short, intense relationships before our marriage, and what seemed to be a tendency for impulsive decisions. Nothing overtly criminal, but a history that hinted at a lack of long-term planning or foresight. A former acquaintance of Clara's, a woman she'd worked with briefly at a restaurant before I deployed, was discreetly approached. She recalled Clara being unusually secretive during those months, making excuses for certain absences and appearing withdrawn. She mentioned Clara had taken a sudden, unexplained leave of absence around the time of Daisy's birth. The acquaintance couldn't offer concrete evidence, but her observations added another layer to the narrative of concealment. To solidify my timeline, Mr. Davies obtained my official military deployment records, which clearly showed my presence in Afghanistan and my medical reports detailing my accident and subsequent recovery at Walter Reed. These documents confirm my physical absence and incapacity during the crucial period. At the hearing, Mr. Davies presented a comprehensive case. He started with the DNA evidence, the incontrovertible proof that Clara was Daisy's biological mother. He then laid out the birth certificate and the adoption papers, highlighting the unknown father designation and the coinciding date of Daisy's birth with Clara's fabricated miscarriage story. He argued that while I was not biologically Daisy's father, I had been profoundly defrauded into believing I was losing our child, an event that shaped my emotional recovery and marital future. The emotional distress and financial implications of this deception were severe. The judge listened intently after Mr. Davies concluded, and Clara's attorney made her counter-arguments about privacy. The judge delivered his ruling. He acknowledged the compelling evidence of fraud. Considering the extraordinary circumstances, he ordered a limited unsealing of Daisy's adoption records, specifically for my legal team to review, not for general public access. It was a partial victory, a crack in the wall of secrecy. The unsealed records delivered to Mr. Davies' office a few days later revealed the names of Daisy's adoptive parents, the Jensens. They lived in a nearby state less than a day's drive. Mr. Davies explicitly instructed me, "John, you are not to contact the Jensens directly. Any communication must go through legal channels. Any unauthorized contact could jeopardize our case and the child's privacy." I understood. Precision and protocol were paramount. Facing the mounting evidence, the DNA, the unsealed records, the unraveled lies, Clara's attorney contacted Mr. Davies. She suggested Clara consider a plea bargain to reduce potential penalties. It was a sign of weakness, an admission that their defense was crumbling. I felt a cold sense of justice, a quiet satisfaction. But there was also a growing emotional distance from the entire situation. It was no longer about hurt or anger. It was about facts, legal maneuvers, and the methodical pursuit of truth. I looked back at the years I had shared with Clara, the supposed foundation of our life, and saw it now as a meticulously constructed lie. Every memory was recontextualized, every shared moment tainted by the knowledge of what she had hidden. Coincidentally, the military also initiated an internal inquiry into my situation. Captain Peterson explained it was standard procedure when a service member was involved in such a complex personal and legal matter. They offered support for my legal and personal challenges, reminding me of available resources for counseling or financial advice. The structure of the military, a system I once thought I'd left behind, now offered a strange, detached form of solace. Mr. Davies made contact with the Jensens' attorney. It was a delicate process, informing them of the unsealed records and the ongoing legal situation involving Clara and me. As expected, the Jensens were initially shocked. Their attorney conveyed their deep concern for Daisy's well-being and her stability. They were protective, their priority understandably being the child they had raised as their own. After several exchanges, the Jensens, through their attorney, agreed to a discreet meeting. It was held in a neutral location, a conference room in Mr. Davies' law office, far from the prying eyes of the military base or their home. The Jensens were reserved, wary. Mr. Davies led the discussion, carefully presenting my story, the DNA evidence, and the documentation of Clara's deception. When it was my turn, I spoke plainly, concisely. "My pursuit is for truth," I stated, my voice even, "not to disrupt Daisy's life. I had a right to know. I was defrauded." I assured them my aim was not to claim Daisy or interfere with their family, but to understand the full scope of the deceit Clara had perpetrated. The Jensens, Mr. and Mrs. Jensen, listened intently. They confirmed that Daisy was a happy, well-adjusted child, now 9 years old. She was completely unaware of her birth circumstances or the legal turmoil surrounding her adoption. Their quiet assurances eased a tension I hadn't realized I was holding. They expressed a willingness to cooperate if it meant protecting Daisy from any future harm or legal disputes, should Clara ever attempt to complicate matters. Their primary concern was their daughter's peace of mind. During the meeting, an unexpected detail emerged. The Jensens recalled a vague description of the biological father provided by the adoption agency at the time of Daisy's adoption. It wasn't much. A younger man, professional, dark hair. It was generic, designed to protect anonymity, but it was a lead. Mr. Davies picked up on it immediately. This description, combined with the timeline leading up to Daisy's birth, prompted Mr. Davies and his investigative team to delve deeper into Clara's past relationships. They specifically focused on the period before her deployment and shortly after her return. They meticulously cross-referenced Clara's work history, her social circles, and any male acquaintances who fit the description. Through their detailed investigation, a name emerged: David Larson, a former colleague of Clara's from a short-term job she held before we were married. He fit the vague description, and his timeline of residence and employment aligned suspiciously with the period of Daisy's conception. He was a strong candidate. Mr. Davies moved quickly. A court order was obtained, compelling David Larson to provide a DNA sample. Larson, through his own bewildered attorney, initially resisted, claiming privacy. But under the clear legal threat of contempt of court, he eventually complied. The sample was sent to the Day Analysis Center, where my previous samples had been processed. 3 weeks later, the results came back. David Larson was indeed the biological father of Daisy. I received the news from Mr. Davies over the phone. A detached satisfaction settled over me. The final piece of the paternity puzzle had fallen into place. It confirmed what I had pieced together about Clara's deception, reinforcing the sheer depth of her lies. This wasn't just about a hidden child. It was about a hidden relationship, a hidden life, concealed even from her closest family. The Jensens were discreetly informed of this development. It added another layer to the already complex truth they would one day have to navigate with Daisy, but it also provided a clear, factual answer to a lingering unknown. I instructed Mr. Davies to present this new evidence to Clara's legal team. It wasn't a negotiation point, it was further proof, solidifying the fraud case against her. It demonstrated that she had not only concealed Daisy's birth, but had actively and knowingly misrepresented the paternity to me and implicitly to the adoption agency. The legal net was tightening. Confronted with the irrefutable DNA evidence of David Larson's paternity, Clara's legal team finally conceded. There was no more room for denial, no more legal maneuvering. Her attorney, a pragmatic woman, advised Clara to settle. The case against her, built on layers of documented deception and scientific proof, was overwhelming. To prolong it would only incur more legal fees and potential punitive measures. A formal deposition was scheduled. It was held in Mr. Davies' office, Clara present with her attorney, facing a court reporter and Mr. Davies. I was there as well, an observer. Under oath, Clara was questioned about the entirety of her deception. The pressure was immense, the questions precise and relentless. She finally admitted everything: the affair with David Larson, the concealed pregnancy, Daisy's birth, the false story of a miscarriage, and the subsequent adoption. Her voice was low, strained, devoid of its usual performative quality. She explained her motive: to hide the infidelity, to protect her reputation, and to maintain her marriage, especially within the confines of military life, where such transgressions could have severe social and professional consequences. She had gambled, and she had lost. I watched her, a cold, analytical gaze my only expression. There was no surge of anger, no satisfaction of vengeance, just a quiet absorption of facts. The emotional landscape was barren. When Mr. Davies concluded his questioning, I asked a few of my own. They were direct, factual, focused on clarifying specific timelines and details of her lies, ensuring no stone was left unturned in the factual record. When did you first know you were pregnant? What was your exact conversation with David Larson about the baby? Who helped you arrange the adoption? Each question was a nail in the coffin of her deception. The court issued the final divorce decree a few weeks later. Due to the egregious nature of the marital fraud, the judge granted me a larger share of the assets, going beyond the typical 50-50 split. Clara was also ordered to pay a significant sum to me as compensation for emotional distress and the substantial legal fees I had incurred. It was not about the money, but about the official recognition of the damage she had inflicted. In addition, the court issued a protective order, a crucial component Mr. Davies had argued for. This order legally ensured Daisy's anonymity and, more importantly, explicitly prevented Clara from ever contacting Daisy or her adoptive family. the Jensens. It was a shield, protecting the child from the very woman who had brought her into the world and then woven a web of lies around her existence. With the divorce finalized, I systematically closed all remaining joint bank accounts and transferred my assets into my personal accounts. The meticulous process of separating my life from Clara's was complete. I began to sell personal items that evoked memories of our shared past: a painting Clara had loved, a set of china we'd received as a wedding gift. It wasn't just clearing physical space. It was severing sentimental ties, removing the last vestiges of a life built on falsehoods. Captain Peterson and other military superiors expressed their support. They acknowledged the difficult ordeal I had faced, the public nature of the scandal, and the resilience I had shown. So it was a quiet affirmation, a nod of understanding from men who valued integrity. Now, free from the immediate burden of Clara's deception, I began to plan for my future. I was profoundly changed. The man who had deployed to Afghanistan was gone, replaced by someone colder, more wary, but also clearer in purpose. The idea of a fresh start, a complete break, became paramount. I began to consider a transfer to a new post, perhaps even a non-combat role, somewhere far from Fort Lewis, far from the echoes of the past, a place where I could rebuild, brick by factual brick, a life of my own making. The legal papers were signed. The final gavel had fallen, a small, unremarkable sound in the quiet courtroom. I had won in the legal sense. Clara's fraud was acknowledged by the court, compensation awarded for my distress in legal fees, and the protective order secured. It was an empty victory, a shell of what I once thought justice should feel like. The truth was finally mine, but the cost had been immense. The path forward was clear, though, carved out of the rubble of deception. Clara, I heard through Mr. Davies, was facing the full brunt of her choices. Financially ruined by the judgments and her legal expenses, she had lost everything she had worked for, or rather, what she had tried to secure through elaborate deception. Social ostracism within our former military circles was swift and absolute. Her attempts to maintain a facade of respectability had crumbled into dust. David Larson, the biological father, was quietly contacted by his own attorney. Mr. Davies had made sure he was informed of his legal obligations, if any, regarding Daisy. Given his past non-involvement and the established adoption, the law's default position favored maintaining the status quo, ensuring Daisy's stability remained undisturbed. There was no push for him to claim paternity. The Jensens and I, through our respective lawyers, established a formal, confidential agreement. It was a document designed to protect Daisy's privacy above all else. No contact, no interference from my side. Just a silent, unspoken understanding that the truth, however painful, was now known to a few, but Daisy's world would remain undisturbed, as it should be. The decision regarding Daisy weighed on me, not with emotion, but with a logical assessment of the ethical implications. I chose not to pursue a relationship with her. She had a loving family, a stable home, parents who had cherished her since birth. Inserting myself, a relative stranger, into her life would be a selfish act, potentially damaging to her well-being. My pursuit had been for truth, not for a fabricated family or a retroactive claim. Daisy was not my biological daughter, but her existence had been the crucible in which Clara's lies were exposed. She was the hope I had mourned, the child I believed I had lost with Clara. The moral complexity of it all was a cold knot in my stomach. The child I thought was mine, the profound sorrow I had carried, was a ghost of a different man's past. I processed the betrayal without anger. Anger was unproductive, an emotional indulgence I could not afford. Instead, there was a cold, logical acceptance of irreversible facts. Clara's choices, her actions, were undeniable. My trust had been shattered, rebuilt with a foundation of stone. The government house at Fort Lewis was no longer mine. I had arranged the transfer to new, smaller quarters on another part of the base, a place with fewer echoes. The old house, now stripped bare by Clara's departure and my subsequent purging, was the last physical tie to the marriage that had never truly been what I believed. Its emptiness was a reflection of my own, but also a space for a new beginning. I buried myself deeper in my military career. The routine, the objective tasks, the clear chain of command, these offered a strange, rigid solace. It was a world of facts, of missions, where consequences were direct and expectations were unambiguous. No room for hidden agendas or elaborate lies. I reflected on the nature of trust and deception. The experience had hardened my perspective on human relationships. I saw the world with new eyes, constantly sifting for inconsistencies, for the subtle tells of concealed truths. It wasn't paranoia, but a learned vigilance, a survival mechanism. A profound internal shift had occurred. My worldview was permanently altered. The cold truth had reshaped me, stripped away layers of naive assumptions. I was a different man, forged in the crucible of discovery, tempered by the unyielding pursuit of facts. Occasionally I would think of Daisy, a silent acknowledgement of the child who wasn't mine, but whose existence had unearthed a devastating lie. Her image, inferred from the adoption papers, remained abstract, a symbol. She was a catalyst, a silent witness to a betrayal that changed everything. I avoided all contact with Clara. The chapter of our life together was decisively closed. There was nothing more to say, nothing more to explain. The facts had spoken, and the consequences had been served. I continued to embody the disciplined, logical approach that had guided me through the investigation. I was a man forged by deception and meticulously rebuilt by truth, unyielding in my resolve, unwavering in my new, solitary purpose. I would look out at the vast, indifferent landscape of the Pacific Northwest, a place that reminded me of the stark, unyielding reality of the Midwest I'd come from. There was a cold comfort in its immutable nature, much like the new reality of my own life. The unraveling of Clara's deception left a permanent scar, not a gaping wound that bled emotion, but a cold, precise incision that altered the very structure of my being. The trust I once held, the foundation of every relationship, evaporated. I became an observer, constantly dissecting actions for hidden motives, a man stripped of innocence and forged into a wary realist. Clara was left with public shame and financial ruin, a just, if hollow, consequence. Daisy, the unwitting epicenter of this storm, remained shielded, her life undisturbed, a quiet victory in a battle of lies. The profound consequence was not just the end of a marriage, but the end of a certain kind of man. I was now a solitary figure, bound by logic, defined by the cold, hard truths I had painstakingly unearthed. My world was quieter, emptier, but also finally clear. The unraveling of Clara's deception left a permanent scar, not a gaping wound that bled emotion, but a cold, precise incision that altered the very structure of my being. The trust I once held, the foundation of every relationship, evaporated. I became an observer, constantly dissecting actions for hidden motives, a man stripped of innocence and forged into a wary realist. Clara was left with public shame and financial ruin, a just, if hollow, consequence. Daisy, the unwitting epicenter of this storm, remained shielded, her life undisturbed, a quiet victory in a battle of lies. The profound consequence was not just the end of a marriage, but the end of a certain kind of man. I was now a solitary figure, bound by logic, defined by the cold, hard truths I had painstakingly unearthed. My world was quieter, emptier, but also finally clear.